The phone kept buzzing like a stubborn mosquito I could not swat away. I had placed it face down on the table, but the vibration carried through the thin wood and echoed into the quiet of my apartment. The screen lit up with a pale glow every few seconds, bright enough to catch my attention in the corner of my eye. I did not need to look. I already knew the names. Mom, Dad, Matthew. Over and over again, in a relentless pattern, as if the three of them had formed a choir determined to drag me back into their song. It was almost midnight in Queens, and my small apartment was wrapped in the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the ceiling fan, the occasional car horn far down the street, all of it seemed distant compared to the persistent buzzing of the phone. I had been home for less than an hour after finishing another 12-hour day at the firm. My jacket still hung over the back of the chair, my laptop bag slumped by the door. The apartment was not much, but it was mine. A rented space on the second floor, with peeling paint on the bathroom door and a couch that sagged in the middle. Still, it was the first place I had ever lived where no one waited behind the door with a bill in hand or a voice heavy with accusation. The phone lit up again. Message appeared before the call ended. Daniela, please answer. If you care about us, even a little, pick up. Matthew cannot handle this anymore. I stared at the words until the screen dimmed again. Care about us. Handle this. The phrases pressed against my chest like an old bruise. I set the phone back down, face first, and tried to breathe through the knot in my throat. It had been months since I walked away, but they still spoke as if nothing had changed, as if my absence was a mistake waiting to be corrected. I pushed the phone away and reached for the glass of water instead. The water was lukewarm, but it grounded me. My eyes moved to the laptop still open on the table. The spreadsheet glared at me, rows of black numbers lined up like soldiers ready to remind me of every choice I had made. Electricity, gas, mortgage, credit card debt, car repairs, Dad's medical bills, Matthew's tuition that never lasted more than a semester. Each line was a wound that had never healed. The total at the bottom was not just a number. It was a story. $18,470. My story of sacrifice drained month after month while they called it responsibility. I closed the laptop slowly, almost tenderly, because the sight of those numbers still felt like an open flame. The silence returned, wrapping around me again, thicker this time. Silence had always been complicated for me. In my parents' house, silence was a threat. My mother's silence meant punishment. My father's silence meant judgment. Matthew's silence meant calculation, a pause before another request. Here, in my small apartment, silence was supposed to mean peace. And yet, with the phone buzzing against the table, silence felt like the beginning of another battle. When the phone buzzed again, I let it ring until it stopped. A voicemail icon appeared instantly. Against my better judgment, I pressed play. My mother's voice poured out of the speaker, cracked and urgent. Daniela, you have to come back. Your father is exhausted. Matthew is overwhelmed. The house is falling apart. We cannot do this without you. Her words filled the room, but I could not stop hearing the space between them. Not once did she ask if I was all right. Not once did she acknowledge the years I had spent carrying them. It was not a plea. It was a demand. I set the phone down again, this time harder, and leaned back in the chair. The ceiling above me was cracked, paint curling into thin lines like veins. I followed one of them with my eyes until it disappeared into the shadows. I whispered to myself, so softly I almost did not hear it. I cannot keep doing this. But even as I said it, I knew. I knew the cycle had a way of pulling me back. Their voices were like ropes tied to my skin, tugging at every scar that had never fully closed. I rubbed my palms together, the skin rough from stress and restless nights, and tried to convince myself that I had a choice. The clock on the wall ticked past 12. I should have been in bed. Instead, I sat there, caught between the life I was trying to build and the life that refused to let me go. When the phone buzzed again, I did not look. I stood up, walked to the window, and pulled the curtains aside. The city stretched out before me, lights scattered like fallen stars. Somewhere out there, people were sleeping without fear of sudden demands. Somewhere, people lived without the constant weight of being responsible for everyone else. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and let the city's breath steady my own. I turned back to the table. The phone was glowing again, another call, another chance to be pulled back under. My chest ached, but I forced myself to walk away. I switched off the light, leaving the phone to glow alone in the dark. That night I lay awake on the couch, listening to the sounds outside the window, footsteps, laughter, the distant siren of an ambulance. The city lived and breathed around me. My heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. I knew it was only a matter of time before I had to face them again. Mom, Dad, Matthew, and the house that still haunted me even though I had left it behind. I woke up with the phone still glowing on the table. I had not meant to fall asleep on the couch, but the exhaustion from the day had finally dragged me under. When I rubbed my eyes, the first thing I saw was a long list of missed calls stacked one after another, like dominoes waiting to crush me. 10 from Mom, 7 from Dad, 4 from Matthew. The screen looked almost ridiculous, as if my family believed persistence could replace love. I pushed the phone aside and stood up slowly. My body ached the way it always did after a day spent hunched over numbers that never belonged to me. My job was to make sense of other people's money, to track their mistakes, to find patterns where chaos lived. It was ironic, really, that I could manage million-dollar accounts, but had failed for so long to control the black hole of my own family. The kitchen was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I opened it and found only a half-empty bottle of water, a slice of bread wrapped in paper, and a container of leftover noodles from 3 nights ago. I had not had the energy to cook, not with the endless overtime at the firm. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. The stillness of the morning was broken only by the weight in my chest. I tried to remember the last time Mom had called just to ask how I was doing. I could not. Every conversation had turned into a transaction, every sentence lined with expectation. My father was no better. His messages rarely carried words like love or proud. They were instructions. Reminders, a reminder to pay, a reminder to carry, a reminder to never forget my place. And then there was Matthew, my little brother who was not so little anymore. At 32, he still lived under their roof, still clung to the idea that the world owed him more than effort could buy. He had never once thanked me for the bills I paid or the debts I cleared. Instead, he had smirked when I faltered, as if my exhaustion was a personal failure, a weakness he did not share. The phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from him. You think you're special just because you left. You think you can walk away while we suffer. I stared at the words and laughed under my breath. Not a laugh of humor, but the kind that slips out when you finally realize the absurdity of something. Suffer. They had twisted the meaning of that word so far that they believed their suffering was mine to heal. I opened my laptop again, even though I dreaded the sight of the spreadsheet. The total still sat there at the bottom, unmoved by the night that had passed, $18,470. I clicked into the cell, highlighted it, and then deleted the number. The screen looked blank for a moment, almost like a fresh start. But I typed it back in, slowly, digit by digit. I needed to see it. I needed to remember that this was not love. This was theft dressed in the clothes of family. My mind drifted back to the night I first started that spreadsheet. I had come home with groceries heavy in both arms, exhausted from a double shift. No one offered to help carry the bags. No one asked how I was. Instead, my mother had called from the living room, asking if I had remembered Dad's favorite cookies. My father sat in his chair, silent. Matthew sprawled on the couch, his feet on the table, a game controller in his hands. That was the night I realized that nothing I gave would ever be enough. I opened my laptop after midnight, typed each bill, each transfer, each sacrifice. The total grew like a shadow, and I taped a printed copy to the wall above my desk, a reminder not to forget again. Now, months later, that shadow had followed me here. Even in this small apartment, far from their demands, it lived inside my chest. The phone rang again, this time cutting through my thoughts like a blade. I answered without meaning to, my thumb slipping across the screen before my brain could stop me. Daniela, my mother's voice came immediately, sharp and pleading all at once. Finally, do you know what is happening here? The bank sent another letter. Your father is worn down. Matthew cannot manage this by himself. We are drowning. I closed my eyes and listened not to her words but to the tone behind them. There was no softness, no real concern for me, just desperation wrapped in blame. Mom, I said slowly, my voice low. I have been sending money for years. I have carried everything. If the house is drowning now, it is not because of me. It is because you never learned how to swim. Her breath caught on the other end, a sharp inhale like I had struck her. For a second, silence hung between us. Then my father's voice appeared, heavy and flat. Family is responsibility, Daniela. You should know that. If you were a real daughter, you would not question it. You would help. A heat rose in my chest, not anger exactly, but something deeper. The kind of heat that comes from finally recognizing the truth. I am your daughter, I replied, my throat tightening. But I am not your bank, I am not your backup plan. Matthew's voice shouted from the background. Stop being dramatic, just pay it. You make good money. What is the big deal? I pulled the phone from my ear, staring at it as if it were some venomous thing. Their voices blurred into a chorus of demand, a chorus that had followed me since I was a child. I pressed end call and let the screen go dark. My hands trembled, but I felt lighter somehow, as if setting down a weight I had carried for too long. The rest of the morning passed in fragments. I showered. I dressed for work. I stood in front of the mirror and stared at the woman who looked back. My hair was damp, my eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, but there was something new in my reflection. A question I had not dared to ask before. What if I never picked up again? What if I let their calls ring into silence and never answered? On the subway ride into Manhattan, the question stayed with me. People pressed close, their faces tired and blank. Everyone carried something invisible, burdens that weighed them down. I wondered how many of them, like me, mistook obligation for love. How many believed that sacrifice was proof of worth? By the time I stepped out into the cold air near the firm, the phone buzzed again. Another message. Another plea disguised as demand. I slipped it back into my bag without looking. For the first time in years, I did not feel the immediate urge to respond. That night when I returned to my apartment, I found myself sitting at the table once more, the laptop open, the spreadsheet glowing. I scrolled down to the last line and added one more entry. Freedom, cost, priceless. I closed the laptop, placed my hands flat on the table, and took a long breath. The phone buzzed again, but I did not move. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Inside, for the first time, I felt the quiet as something different. Not punishment, not a storm, just peace. And yet I knew this was only the beginning. The phone calls would not stop. The demands would not fade. Sooner or later, I would have to face them. But this time, I would face them on my terms. That night, as I lay down on the couch with the window open and the cool breeze brushing against my skin, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, I will be ready." I told myself I would never step back into that house again. I told myself the last time I closed that front door, the click of the lock was final, like the period at the end of a sentence. And yet, 2 weeks later, there I was driving down the familiar street, my hands tight on the steering wheel, my breath shallow as if the air itself was heavier here. The neighborhood had not changed. The same cracked sidewalks, the same leaning mailboxes, the same tired trees stretching their branches toward a sky that never seemed blue enough. Even from a distance, I could see the house. The pale paint peeling from the siding, the porch light that flickered like a dying star, the curtains drawn tightly as if hiding the weight of all that lived inside. As I pulled into the driveway, my chest tightened. I remembered the nights I came home carrying bags of groceries after a 12-hour shift. No one ever met me at the door. No one ever asked how I was. My mother would only call from the kitchen, asking if I had remembered to pick up what Dad liked or if I had bought Matthew another one of his favorites. It was never about me. It had never been about me. I killed the engine and sat in silence. The house loomed before me, not large, not grand, but suffocating. A structure that had swallowed years of my life without ever giving anything back. For a moment, I considered reversing out of the driveway and never looking back. But my phone buzzed again in the passenger seat, a reminder of why I was here. I grabbed the grocery bags from the car. Yes, I had stopped at the store on my way, even though every fiber of me resented the thought. 2 cartons of almond milk, some lean beef, bread, and the same cookies Dad liked. Old habits die hard. Maybe I wanted to avoid another argument. Maybe I was not as free as I pretended. The front door was slightly ajar when I reached it, as if they had been waiting. I nudged it open with my shoulder. The familiar scent of cleaning chemicals stung my nose. My mother always scrubbed the house on weekends, not out of love for cleanliness, but out of a need to prove she was still in control. Inside, the living room lights were already on, too bright, too exposing. I set the bags on the kitchen counter and turned around to see her standing there. My mother. Arms crossed, eyes sharp, posture rigid. Her silence filled the doorway like a wall. "We need to talk," she said, her voice clipped and cold. I froze for a moment, still in my shoes, still carrying the weight of the day on my shoulders. "I just got off work," I managed, my voice low. "Can you give me a minute?" "No," she snapped. "This cannot wait any longer." From the corner of my eye, I saw my father emerging from the stairwell, his hat in his hands, his face unreadable. Behind him, Matthew's voice drifted from the living room. "Is she here?" He muttered, not even looking away from the glowing screen of the television. The sound of a video game filled the air, childish and grating. I tightened my grip on my bag. "What is going on?" Mom sighed, as if I were the source of all her troubles. "Daniela, you have a good job, a car, your own apartment. This household is struggling. Your father is tired. Matthew is still trying to find his path. I think it is time you step up more." The words sank in like knives. More, always more. Had the $1,000 transfers each month not been enough? Had the years of covering their bills meant nothing? I have been paying the electricity, the gas, the water, the internet, and part of the mortgage for years, I said, my voice shaking but firm. What more do you want from me? Dad stepped forward, his voice flat, his gaze fixed on the floor. We are talking about responsibility, Daniela. Family means responsibility. If you were an adult, you would understand that. I bit my lip hard enough to taste iron. And what is Matthew then, a guest who lives here for free? That finally caught his attention. He dropped the controller and looked at me, his mouth twisted into a sneer. Don't drag me into this. I never asked you for anything. If you want to stop paying, then stop. Spare us the fake generosity. A laugh escaped me, dry and bitter. My chest felt tight, as though every word was being carved into me. The problem, Matthew, is that I was never pretending. I was actually generous. My mother slammed her hand against the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen. Enough, you are becoming more selfish every day, Daniela. Living on your own has made you arrogant. Do you even realize this house is at risk of foreclosure? Matthew's loans were denied, your father lost his insurance, and you are sitting here counting every dollar as if we are a burden. I stared at her, then at the house around us. The house I had kept afloat. The people who had never once asked if I had enough to eat, if I had ever missed a rent payment, if I was ever drowning too. So, what is this about? I asked, my voice calm now, almost hollow. Do you want my entire paycheck? Do you want me to pay the mortgage in full? Buy Matthew a new car so he can finally feel motivated? Silence fell like a thick curtain. Dad gripped his hat tighter. Matthew glared, his lips curled. My mother's eyes never wavered, sharp and unyielding. I felt a strange lightness in that silence. For the first time, I understood the truth I had been avoiding. They did not see me as a daughter. They saw me as a lifeline, a walking account number, a safety net they could stretch until it snapped. That realization sat heavy in my chest as I picked up my bag. My legs trembled as I turned toward the door. The cold night air seeped through the cracks, and I let it pull me closer. And just as I reached the threshold, my mother's voice cut through the silence. If you dare turn your back on this family now, Daniela, don't you ever come back. I froze, the weight of her words pressing against me, but instead of pain, I felt clarity. I looked back one last time. My father stared at the floor, Matthew smirked, my mother glared like a stranger. Not one of them moved to stop me, so I opened the door and stepped into the night. The night outside was colder than I expected. The wind cut across my face as if to remind me I was alive, as if to remind me I could still choose where to walk. I paused on the porch, the grocery bag still heavy in my hands, and for a brief moment I thought about leaving it there, letting them have the food they demanded. But something inside me refused. I had bought those things. I had carried them here. They did not deserve even that piece of me anymore. So I turned, stepped down the porch steps, and walked toward the car with the bag still pressed against my hip. I sat inside for a long while without starting the engine. The lights from the living room spilled out through the thin curtains, bright rectangles cutting into the darkness. Through the window I could see Matthew slouched back on the sofa again, controller in hand, as if nothing had happened. My father moved slowly across the room, his shoulders sagging like the weight of the world pressed down on him, but I knew it was not the weight of responsibility. It was the weight of excuses. And my mother, she stood still in the kitchen doorway, her figure sharp against the fluorescent light. Arms crossed, jaw set. She did not look out the window, did not look at me. To her, I was already gone. I gripped the steering wheel and tried to steady my breathing. I expected to feel grief. I expected to feel rage. Instead, what I felt was emptiness, and within that emptiness, a strange kind of freedom. It was as though someone had cut a string that had been tied around my throat for years. But freedom is not silent, it echoes. My phone buzzed again in the passenger seat, and I glanced down to see another message. This one from my father. You need to know your place. I laughed softly, bitterly, the sound swallowed by the dark interior of the car. My place. That was all I had ever been to them, a place to take from, a place to unload their failures. Never a daughter, never someone to cherish, just a place. I finally started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. Each street lamp I passed felt like a line break in a sentence I had been writing for years. A sentence that was finally reaching its end. The drive back to Queens was long and quiet. I did not turn on the radio. I did not call anyone. I let the sound of the tires on the pavement carry me forward. By the time I reached my apartment, it was close to midnight again. I carried the grocery bags upstairs, set them on the counter, and stood in the silence of my small kitchen. This silence felt different from the one in the house. That silence had been heavy, suffocating, filled with things unsaid and expectations unspoken. This silence was light, clean, almost fragile, as if it could shatter if I moved too quickly. I did not want to break it. I placed each item from the bag carefully into the fridge, into the cabinets, into the small spaces that were mine alone. When I was finished, I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. Images of the night replayed behind my eyelids, my mother's glare, my father's silence, Matthew's sneer. The way none of them had tried to stop me, the way none of them had asked me to stay. And yet, beneath all that, their words lingered. If you dare turn your back, do not come back. You need to know your place. Stop pretending generosity. They were like splinters under my skin, too small to pull out but sharp enough to sting with every movement. I opened my laptop again because sometimes the only way to steady myself was through numbers. The spreadsheet blinked up at me, row after row of expenses I had carried. I scrolled down to the bottom and stared at the total. $19,840. I whispered it aloud, as if naming it gave it less power. Almost $20,000. Gone. I thought of the trips I never took, the clothes I never bought, the weekends I spent bent over my desk instead of outside in the sun. All because I believed, foolishly, that love was proven by sacrifice, that if I carried them long enough, hard enough, they would finally see me. But the truth was carved into those rows of numbers. They did not see me. They never had. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Matthew. Without us, you'd be nothing. I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred against the glass. Nothing. That was what they thought of me. That was what they wanted me to believe. But the longer I looked, the more certain I became that they were wrong. I had survived every long night, every bill, every insult, and I was still here. Breathing, standing, building a life with my own hands. I was not nothing. I blocked Matthew's number. My thumb hovered over my father's name, then my mother. Not yet, I thought. Not tonight. But the thought of silence, real silence, free of their voices, flickered in the back of my mind like a candle waiting to be lit. I closed the laptop and pushed it aside. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down on the couch, and let the quiet fill me. Outside, the city hummed. Inside, I was learning to breathe again. I knew the battle was not over. I knew they would not stop. But as I sat there, staring out the window at the lights scattered across the skyline, I realized something important. I could leave that house, but more than that, I could leave the role they had written for me. I could step out of the place they had forced me into and write my own. And for the first time in years, I wanted to. I thought that leaving the house again would close the wound for good. But the truth about wounds is that they do not close when you turn your back on them. They follow you, hidden under the skin, waiting for the slightest touch to bleed again. The morning after I walked out, I sat at my desk in the office staring at a stack of reports that blurred together. My fingers moved over the keyboard, but my mind was not there. It was still trapped in the kitchen of that house, hearing my mother slam her hand against the table, hearing my father tell me to know my place, hearing Matthew sneer about fake generosity. Their voices had been stitched into me so deeply that even silence could not drown them out. I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting toward the window. The city below looked alive, buzzing with people who were carrying their own burdens. Some of them smiled, some of them hurried, all of them moving as if they knew where they were headed. I envied them. For so long, I had moved only in circles, round and round the same demands, the same guilt, the same story. My phone vibrated on the desk. A new message from Mom. It was short, almost too simple. Daniela, you have always been the strong one. We need you again, the strong one. I almost laughed. That was the role they had given me since I was a child. Strong enough to cover for everyone else's mistakes, strong enough to take the blame, strong enough to keep silent, strong enough to disappear when they needed me invisible. I closed the message without answering and turned back to the reports, but the numbers on the screen blurred into numbers from another time. I was 11 when Dad's truck was scratched. I remember the way Mom gasped when she saw the long white mark down the side. I had been at school all day. I even had a math test that morning, my hands still aching from gripping the pencil so hard. But when Mom turned, her eyes landed on me. Daniela, did you touch the truck? She asked. Matthew sat at the table with a slice of pizza, sauce on his chin, and he said nothing. He had been the one who backed out of the garage too quickly, but silence protected him like a shield. And my silence damned me. I shook my head, but it did not matter. I was the one questioned. I was always the one questioned. Favoritism in our house did not arrive like a thunderstorm. It seeped in like mold, slow and invisible, until one day you realized the walls were no longer clean. The memory snapped away when a colleague tapped my desk, asking about the report. I forced a smile, gave an answer, and tried to push the images back into the past, but they refused to stay buried. That night, after work, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures from college, when I worked nights at a steakhouse and studied by lamplight until my eyes blurred. No one ever came to visit me then. No one ever called to ask if I had eaten. But when Matthew attended a weekend woodworking class, my entire family flooded Facebook with pictures, praising him as if he had been accepted into an Ivy League school. I remembered the fever of 103, the hospital trip I made alone because no one had time to take me. And I remembered the night Mom called an ambulance because Matthew had a stomach ache from eating too many fries. She and Dad spent the night in the ER with him while I got a text. There are instant noodles at home. The memories piled up like stones on my chest. I had carried them quietly for years, believing that if I just endured, if I just gave enough, the balance would shift. I believed love meant sacrifice. I believed they would see me eventually. But the truth was in every faded photo, in every ignored success, in every lonely night. They had never seen me. I turned off my phone and tried to sleep. But my dreams were restless, filled with images of the old living room, of my mother's cold eyes, of Matthew's smirk. The next day, when I returned home from work, a letter was waiting in my mailbox. The envelope was thin, official, the kind of letter that made your stomach sink before you even opened it. I tore it carefully and pulled out the page. It was from the bank. Mortgage delinquency notice. Addressed not to me, but to my mother. And yet, my name was printed in the corner, as if to remind me I was tied to this house even when I thought I was free. I sat at the table staring at the words. My first instinct was to call the bank to verify, to see what could be done. But another instinct held me back. I thought of the thousands I had already given, the months of sending money without question, and I wondered for the first time if that money had ever gone where they said it did. The thought froze me. A shadow of doubt crept into my chest. Had I been saving a house that was already sinking? Had I been pouring water into a well with no bottom? My hands shook as I set the letter down. The silence of the apartment pressed in around me. It was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, waiting for me to uncover what I had been too afraid to ask all along. I held the bank letter for a long time before I found the courage to call. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed the number, pressing the phone to my ear while the automated voice guided me through menus. My chest tightened with every second, as if part of me already knew what I was about to hear, but refused to accept it. When a representative finally answered, her voice was calm and professional. I gave her the address, my mother's name, my own information, and asked the question that had burned in my chest since I opened the envelope. "Can you tell me the current status of the mortgage on 1547 Westwood Drive?" She hesitated. There was a rustling of papers, the clicking of a keyboard. Then she spoke. "That account is 8 months delinquent. It is currently in pre-foreclosure. The final notice was sent 3 weeks ago." Her words froze me. 8 months. My mind scrambled, doing the math automatically the way it always did. 8 months. That meant even when I was still sending money, thousands of dollars month after month, the payments had already stopped. "Are you certain?" I whispered, my throat dry. "Yes," she said. "The last recorded payment was over 8 months ago." I ended the call, my body numb. I sat at the table staring at nothing, the letter still lying open beside me. 8 months. So where had the money gone? The money I had sent faithfully, believing I was holding the house together. I opened my laptop again, pulled up the spreadsheet, and traced every entry with my finger. Mortgage, 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 row after row of sacrifices. 18,000, 19,000, almost 20. Money I had denied myself, money I had believed was saving the roof over their heads, and all along they had not been paying the bank. A wave of nausea rose in me. I stood up, pacing the apartment, my thoughts spiraling. I thought about the nights I skipped dinner so I could send them money before the deadline. I thought about the weekends I stayed late at the office, chasing overtime hours to cover a bill they promised to repay. And now, it had all been for nothing. I grabbed my phone and dialed Matthew. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp. "Finally, Mom's freaking out. The bank sent another letter. What's your plan?" "My plan?" I repeated, stunned. "I'm not involved with that house anymore. I don't live there." "Don't play dumb," he snapped. "You've been paying the mortgage all this time, then you suddenly cut us off and now the bank is threatening foreclosure. Don't you feel any responsibility?" I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. "What about the money I sent for 8 straight months? Where did it go?" There was silence on the line. Then Matthew said flatly, "I don't know. Mom said you were only covering part of it. She probably used it for other things." Other things. His tone was casual, dismissive, as if I were asking about spare change. My hands shook. "You live there. You didn't notice the bank notices? The power being shut off then turned back on? You didn't wonder why the mortgage wasn't being paid even though I was sending money?" "Look," he said sharply. "We're struggling. You're out there living comfortably and we're about to lose the house. All it takes is one more month's payment. They'll work with us." A cold laugh escaped me. "I'm not your backup plan anymore, Matthew, and don't say we, I'm not part of your group." I hung up before he could respond. 3 minutes later, Mom called. I let it ring. Her text came next, a string of short messages. "Daniela, I'm sorry if you felt pressured, but this house is yours too. You grew up here. You'll regret it if we lose it." I stared at the words until my vision blurred. My hands clenched around the phone. No, I thought. The truth was finally clear. They had never seen me as their daughter. They had seen me as an insurance policy, a safety net, a walking wallet. And now, even after I left, they still expected me to save them. I sat down, pulled the bank letter closer, and read it again. Delinquent, pre-foreclosure, final notice. It was all there in black and white. No matter how much money I had sent, the house had been sinking for months. That was the twist. The truth I had avoided, the truth I had been too afraid to name. I had not failed them by walking away. They had failed me long before. They had taken everything I gave and used it for themselves, never for the house, never for the family they claimed to protect. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer of my desk, not out of fear, not out of guilt, but as evidence. Proof of the betrayal I could never again deny. That night, as I sat on the couch with the window open and the cold air seeping in, I whispered to myself. They lied to me. All this time they lied. And with that truth came something else. Not despair, not anger, but clarity. For the first time, I could see the wound clearly. And knowing what it was, I could finally begin to choose how to heal. The call came on a Saturday evening, just as I was settling into the quiet of my apartment. I had been trying to read, the lamp glowing warmly beside me, the faint scent of lavender from the candle I had lit curling through the room. It should have been peaceful. But peace is fragile, and in my life, peace never lasted long. The phone lit up with my mother's name. I considered ignoring it the way I had been doing for days, but something inside me tightened. Maybe it was anger that I had been swallowing since the bank's letter. Maybe it was exhaustion from years of silence. Whatever it was, I answered. "Daniela," she said, her voice brittle but demanding. "We need you to come tonight. This cannot wait." I almost laughed. Tonight. As if my life could be summoned at their convenience. But something in me, some combination of fury and resignation, made me agree. "Fine," I said. "I'll come." The drive back to Tulsa felt heavier than the first time. The roads were the same, the neighborhoods unchanged, but my chest carried a different weight. This time, I was not returning out of guilt. This time, I was returning with questions I had avoided too long. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked almost smug, its porch light burning steadily, its curtains drawn tight. I carried no groceries this time. No gifts, no offerings, just myself. Inside, the air smelled faintly of bleach and fried food. The television blared from the living room, Matthew's laugh mixing with the sound of gunfire from his game. My father sat in his chair, silent, his hat in his lap, eyes downcast. My mother was in the kitchen, arms crossed, waiting for me. "Sit," she said, not as an invitation but as a command. I lowered myself into the chair at the table, the same table where I had eaten countless meals in silence, where I had handed over envelopes of cash, where I had swallowed anger like medicine. Mom's eyes bore into me. "You know the situation. The bank is ready to take the house. If you care about your family, you'll help us. This is your responsibility too." I leaned back in the chair, folding my arms. "Is it?" "Because the bank told me the mortgage hasn't been paid in 8 months, even when I was still sending money." Her face flickered, just for a moment, before she steadied herself. "There were other expenses, your father's dental work, Matthew's car, groceries. You know how expensive everything has become. We meant to catch up." I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. "You used my money for everything except what you told me it was for. You let the house fall into foreclosure while I was breaking myself to keep it afloat." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair but said nothing. Matthew finally looked up from the couch, sneering. "You're being dramatic. You make plenty of money. What's a few more months? Just cover it and stop complaining." I turned to him, my jaw tight. "Do you hear yourself? I've sent almost $20,000 and you think I should just keep going as if it's nothing? What have you sacrificed, Matthew? What have you given up for this house, for this family?" His smirk faltered, but only slightly. "I never asked you to pay. You chose to. Don't blame me now." I slammed my hand against the table, the sound cracking through the room. My mother's eyes widened, my father flinched, and Matthew blinked as if he had not expected me to fight back. "I chose," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You guilted me. You shamed me. You told me I was selfish if I didn't help." And when I did help, it was never enough. You drained me and then called me cold when I finally said no. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father stared at the floor. Matthew crossed his arms, muttering under his breath. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice sharp. If you walk away now, Daniela, you will regret it for the rest of your life. Family does not abandon each other. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table, my eyes locked on hers. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't use one person until she breaks. Family doesn't love only when the money comes in. So tell me, what kind of family is this? Her face hardened. It's the only family you have. And in that moment, I realized something that should have been clear years ago. She was wrong. Family is not the people who drain you. Family is not the house that suffocates you. Family is not the bloodline that calls you selfish for choosing to breathe. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. My voice was steady now, no longer trembling. I am not your bank, I am not your backup plan. The room froze. My father finally lifted his head, his eyes heavy with something I could not name, shame, maybe, or fear. Matthew's mouth opened, then closed, words caught in his throat. My mother stared at me as if she no longer recognized who I was. I picked up my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked toward the door. The hallway felt longer than I remembered. Each step toward the door echoed louder than the last, like the house itself was trying to keep me there. I could feel their eyes on my back, 3 pairs of eyes that had watched me grow, watched me bend, watched me break, and never once offered to lift the weight they piled on me. Daniela. My father's voice stopped me for a moment. It was low, worn, almost pleading. I turned slightly, waiting for something, anything that might sound like recognition, like love. But all he said was, if you were a responsible daughter, you would understand. The words struck harder than if he had shouted. I nodded slowly, the ache in my chest solidifying into something colder. Then I guess I am not your daughter anymore. My mother inhaled sharply. Do not you dare say that. Blood is blood, you cannot erase us. I met her gaze, steady now, my voice calm. You erased me a long time ago. Matthew muttered from the couch, his voice dripping with disdain. Good riddance, she acts like she's better than all of us anyway. I let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was exactly what I expected him to say. I turned fully toward the door. I hope one day you realize what you had, I said softly, almost to myself, but I won't be here when you do. The doorknob was cool in my hand, the metal firm and final. I opened it, and the night air rushed in, sharp and clean compared to the heavy air inside. For a moment I stood there, looking back into the house where I had spent so many years. The glow of the living room lamp, the outline of the furniture, the figures of my family frozen in their places. None of them moved toward me. None of them called me back. So I stepped out and pulled the door shut behind me. The click of the lock was sharp, like a blade cutting through the last thread that connected me to that place. The yard was quiet. The streetlights cast pale pools of light on the pavement, and the wind rustled the branches of the old trees. I walked slowly to the car, my bag heavy on my shoulder, the weight of finality pressing into me with every step. When I sat behind the wheel, I did not start the engine right away. I just gripped the steering wheel, both hands tight, staring straight ahead. I expected tears. I expected trembling. Instead, there was stillness. My chest felt hollow, but not in the way emptiness hurts. It was hollow in the way a room feels after you finally clear out the clutter. I thought of the years I had lived in that house, the girl who had sat at that kitchen table, desperate for a kind word that never came. I thought of the long nights working overtime, the grocery bags cutting into my hands, the bills stacked on my desk. I thought of how I had convinced myself that love was measured by sacrifice, that worth was proven by carrying everyone else. And I realized, as the silence filled the car, that I had been wrong all along. Love is not meant to drain you. Family is not meant to use you. And I was not born to be their solution, their scapegoat, their endless reservoir of money and patience. I started the car and pulled out of the driveway. The street lamps blurred past, each one marking the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming. By the time I reached the highway, the house was far behind me, and with it, the chains I had worn for so long. I rolled down the window, letting the cold night air rush against my face. For the first time, the silence did not scare me. It soothed me. And as the city lights grew closer, I whispered into the wind, not for them, but for myself. I am not your bank. I am not your backup plan. I am free. The words left my lips and disappeared into the night, but they stayed inside me, steady and unshakable. That night, I returned to my apartment and set my bag down by the door. The room greeted me with its quiet, its worn furniture, its flickering lamp. Imperfect, but mine. I lit the lavender candle again, sank into the couch, and let the stillness wrap around me like a blanket. It was not the end of the story. I knew the calls would come, the messages would continue, the guilt would try to sneak back in. But it was the end of something else. The end of silence without resistance. The end of carrying a weight that was never mine to bear. For the first time in years, I closed my eyes and slept deeply. No nightmares, no voices calling my name, just the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the steady rhythm of my own breath. The morning after the confrontation felt strange in a way I could not name. I woke before my alarm, the light in my apartment still a soft gray, the city just beginning to stir. The quiet did not feel empty anymore. It felt like a room that had been aired out after years of stale breath. I lay there for a while counting my heartbeats the way I used to do as a child whenever anxiety curled tight in my chest. 1, 2, 3, but the rhythm was steady. My body was tired, my eyes a little swollen, and yet there was a calm that did not ask me to explain itself. I made coffee and let its bitter warmth spread through me. The mug felt solid in my hands, something ordinary and reassuring. I did not check my phone. I did not pull up the spreadsheet. I stood by the window and watched a man on the sidewalk below walk his dog in a small blue sweater. The world kept moving, unbothered by the end of a story that had ruled my life for years. There was comfort in that. The city did not pause for my pain, which meant my pain did not control the city. It did not control me either. I told myself to do one ordinary thing, just one. I changed my sheets. I peeled off the old ones that smelled faintly of lavender and sleep, and I pulled a fresh set from the closet, white with a thin gray line around the edges. I smoothed the corners like I was ironing a page that had been crumpled. The bed looked new. It looked like a promise. Work waited as it always did. I dressed simply, tied my hair back, and left the apartment with my keys in my pocket and a light scarf around my neck. On the subway, I took a seat by the window and watched the grainy tunnels slide past. The car rocked gently. A child laughed across from me, her mother handing her a paper cup of orange juice. I thought about how long it had been since I laughed without worrying who might hear it. At the office, the noise of keyboards and ringing phones met me at the door. Numbers and documents always felt like a language I could trust. They stayed where you put them. They told the same story no matter who read them. I worked quietly through the morning. Small tasks first, then a client call, then a reconciliation that had frustrated me last week but made sense today. I found a discrepancy that had hidden behind a formatting error and corrected it. It was the kind of victory no one notices from the outside. But inside, it felt like proof that my mind still worked the way I needed it to, that the chaos had not swallowed me whole. During lunch, I walked 2 blocks to a small deli that sold grilled chicken salads with lemon dressing. The man behind the counter called everyone friend. He asked how my day was going. I told him the truth. Better than yesterday. He smiled like he understood more than he let on and tucked an extra lemon wedge into my bag. When I returned to my desk, there was a message from Macy, the friend I had run into at a seminar in the spring. It was simple. Coffee after work this week. My treat. I stared at the screen for a moment, surprised by how much the invitation softened me. I typed yes before I could talk myself out of it. By late afternoon, clouds gathered over the city and rain swept across the windows in diagonal strokes. On the way home, I bought a bunch of rosemary and a small mint plant from the shop near the subway entrance. The clerk wrapped them carefully in brown paper. I took them home as if carrying something delicate and living, which of course they were. I placed the rosemary on the kitchen sill and set the mint on the balcony, where the rain could mist its leaves. The apartment smelled clean and green within minutes, like a breath I had been holding had finally left my body. Only then did I pick up my phone. The screen bloomed with missed calls and messages, a familiar garden of thorns. I did not open them. I scrolled to the family group chat, the one that had once announced birthdays and eventually turned into a ledger of demands. I hovered. I waited. I left the group with a single tap and set the phone face down again. The quiet that followed was different from the quiet of morning. It had edges. It had finality, but it was still quiet. It did not bite. I cooked a simple dinner. Garlic in the pan until it turned gold, a handful of spinach that wilted in seconds, 2 eggs cracked and scrambled until soft. I ate by the window with the lights low and the rain tapping against the glass. The fork scraped gently against the plate. I remembered every kitchen where I had eaten fast so I could get back to work or back to the car to deliver money or errands. I remembered every time I had swallowed my words with my food. The memory stung and then passed. I kept eating. After dishes, I pulled a cardboard box from the back of my closet. Inside were pieces of a different life. A certificate from a regional math competition in high school. A program from my college graduation that listed honors beside my name. A photo of me in a white shirt behind the bar at the steakhouse where I worked nights, hair pulled into a messy bun, smile crooked with exhaustion and pride. I spread them on the floor like puzzle pieces and felt a ridiculous urge to apologize to my younger self. For leaving her alone for so long. For believing she had to keep proving herself to be loved. I went to the desk and opened a new document, not the spreadsheet, something else. I wrote a list with no numbers and no columns. I wrote it in full sentences. I will not answer calls that treat me like an obligation. I will not send money without a contract or a plan. I will not explain my boundaries to people who do not listen. I will give myself rest without earning it first. I will spend time with people who see me when I am not useful. I read the list out loud. The words sounded strange at first, as if I had borrowed them. By the third line, they sounded like mine. I printed the page and taped it to the wall above the desk where the spreadsheet used to hang. The paper fluttered a little in the draft from the window. It did not look like rebellion. It looked like order. It looked like a map. In the evening, I went for a walk. The rain had thinned to a mist that clung gently to my skin. The sidewalks glowed with reflected neon. I passed a bakery that had just pulled cinnamon rolls from the oven and almost went in, but the line was long and somehow I liked the idea that sweetness could simply be there even if I did not take it home. I passed a bookstore that was closing for the night, the owner stacking displays with practiced hands. I paused to read the covers through the glass. Stories about women who crossed oceans. Stories about daughters and their mothers. Stories about money and silence and how people become themselves. Back home, I showered and washed the city from my hair. I put on a soft cotton shirt and sat cross-legged on the rug with a cup of peppermint tea. I tried something I had avoided for years. I sat still without music or phone or plans. I listened to my breath. I noticed the place in my chest where worry usually lived. It was quieter, not empty. Quieter. The phone buzzed once. I looked at it. A message from an unknown number. For a moment, my stomach dipped. Then I opened it. A simple line from a colleague. Good work on the reconciliation today. Client approved it without notes. I smiled and let that sentence take up space inside me. Approval without cost. Recognition without demand. I slept early. This time, the quiet felt like someone had put a blanket over the past and whispered to it that it could rest. I did not dream of the house. I did not dream of the kitchen table or the truck or the ambulance lights or the sound of a door slamming. I dreamed of a balcony with plants that did not die when I forgot to water them. I dreamed of a road that did not circle back on itself. The next morning, I woke before the sun again. I brewed coffee and took it out to the balcony where the mint leaves were still beaded with last night's rain. I pinched one leaf and rubbed it between my fingers. The scent rose bright and clean, sharper than yesterday, like a small celebration. I thought about calling the bank again, not to fix anything, but to ask for a copy of the account history for my records. Not because I wanted to reopen the wound, but because clarity belonged to me now. Even the paperwork could serve my peace instead of my fear. I did not rush. I sat with the coffee and watched the sky blush from gray to pale pink. I let myself consider the future in small shapes. A class on Saturday mornings just because it would be interesting. A weekend trip to the coast where the water looks like glass. A savings goal that had nothing to do with anyone else. None of it sounded impossible. None of it sounded selfish. It sounded like life finally speaking in my voice. The phone stayed quiet. I knew that would not last. I also knew that I could choose to let the noise crash against the walls of this new room without letting it in. When I went back inside, the list above my desk caught the light and gleamed a little. I added one more sentence at the bottom. I will build a life that does not require me to disappear. I underlined it with a slow, steady hand. Then I closed the pen, straightened the papers on my desk, and got ready for the day, not as a daughter at the end of herself, but as a woman at the beginning. The week passed slowly, but in a way that felt steady rather than suffocating. Each day I woke early, drank coffee on the balcony, and let the sun warm my face before I stepped into the rush of the city. For once, I did not feel like I was running against time. I was simply living inside of it. Of course, the calls kept coming. My phone filled with voicemails from my mother's sharp voice, my father's heavy silence wrapped in judgment, Matthew's angry demands. I did not listen to all of them. I played one or two just long enough to confirm that nothing had changed. Then I deleted them. The first time I did it, my chest tightened as if I had done something dangerous. By the fourth time, it felt like cleaning dust from a shelf. At work, I began to notice things I had ignored before. The way my colleague Henry always brought an extra sandwich on Wednesdays and offered it around the office. The way our receptionist, Claire, wore a different bright scarf each Monday as if to challenge the gray start of the week. I had been so buried in survival that I had missed these tiny acts of humanity. They became small anchors for me, proof that kindness could exist without being purchased. On Thursday evening, I met Macy for coffee. We sat at a small table near the window of a crowded cafe, steam rising from our mugs. She asked how I was, and for once I answered honestly. I told her about the confrontation, about the bank, about walking away. Her eyes never left mine. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer advice, she just listened. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "That took strength," she said. Strength. The word landed differently when she said it, not as a demand, not as an accusation, but as recognition. I realized then how starved I had been for that kind of acknowledgement. I held on to it like a thread of gold. The following weekend, I did something I had not done in years. I went to the park with a book and nothing else. No laptop, no paperwork, no phone buzzing with obligations. I sat under a tree and read until the words blurred and the pages curled in the breeze. Children ran across the grass, their laughter loud and unashamed. A man played the violin near the fountain, his music lilting and imperfect but beautiful all the same. I stayed there until the sun dipped low, until the shadows grew long. That night I cooked pasta with fresh tomatoes and basil I had bought on the way home. The smell filled the apartment, bright and sharp, and for the first time I sat at the table without feeling the weight of invisible eyes across from me. I poured a glass of wine and raised it in a quiet toast to no one but myself. Later, I opened the drawer where I had tucked the bank's letter. I pulled it out and read it again, line by line. Delinquent, pre-foreclosure, final notice. The words no longer shook me. They no longer felt like chains. They felt like evidence of the truth I had finally accepted. I had never been the problem. I placed the letter back in the envelope, sealed it, and wrote one word across the front in thick black ink. Proof. Then I set it on the bottom shelf of my bookcase. A reminder not of my failure, but of my freedom. As I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My face looked tired, yes, but also lighter, as if some invisible weight had slipped off my shoulders. For so long, I had been haunted by the fear that walking away made me heartless, ungrateful, disloyal. But here I was, still breathing, still standing, and the world had not ended. In fact, it had just begun to open. I slipped into bed, the fresh sheets cool against my skin. Outside, the city hummed its endless lullaby. My phone was silent on the nightstand. I turned off the light and whispered to the darkness, "I am allowed to live." And for the first time, I believed it. The storm did not arrive with thunder. It began with a quiet afternoon and a voicemail that sounded like a door closing. I had just finished watering the mint on the balcony when the phone lit up on the table and displayed a number I did not recognize. For a few seconds I watched it ring, then let it go to voicemail. The message transcribed itself on the screen while the recording saved in the background. "This is a courtesy notice regarding the property at Westwood Drive. Please contact us about the delinquent mortgage and the pending action." There was a direct line beneath it and a name that meant nothing to me. I stood there with the watering can in my hand and felt something uncoil. I had already called the bank once. I knew more than my family wanted me to know. Still, there was a difference between information and certainty. I set the can down, dried my fingers on a dish towel, and called back. The woman who answered sounded measured, the kind of voice that has delivered difficult news so often it has learned how to move gently. I confirmed the address and my name and told her I had received a message. She asked me to hold for a moment while she brought up the file. I listened to the soft instrumental loop that plays in every corporate hallway of the world and watched tiny dust motes dance through the afternoon light as if the air were letting me see what it carried. When she came back, her tone had shifted. I could hear it even though the words remained polite. She explained the timeline again, the 8 months without payment, the notices, the attempts to reach the borrower. I asked if she could send me the account history. She said she could send a general summary, but not full documents unless I was listed as an authorized party. I told her I had sent money regularly for months to help with the mortgage. She paused and said she understood, then asked if I could confirm whether my name appeared on the note or on the title. For a moment, the room tilted. My mouth opened, then closed. I had never asked that question out loud. I had always assumed that my contributions made me part of something even if the paperwork did not catch up. I heard my voice through the phone as if it belonged to someone else. I do not think my name is on either. She was quiet in that way that means everything has already been said. She told me the borrower of record and the co-borrower. They were exactly who I expected. Then, in that same careful voice, she explained what that meant. Without your name on the note or on the title, you are not financially responsible, and you do not have rights to the property. I thanked her because I did not know what else to do and asked her to send the general summary anyway. She promised to email it within the hour and gave me a case number in case I had further questions. I hung up and stared at the plant on the sill. The rosemary held still like a patient witness while the mint moved slightly in the draft from the window. I felt the truth settle into me like a stone at the bottom of clear water. I could see it now, heavy and simple. The house had never been mine, not even a fraction. Not in responsibility, not in ownership, not in rights. Every dollar I had sent had been a gift thrown into a closed well. The email arrived before the tea kettle finished heating. The summary charted the months like a calendar of silence. Last payment, fees applied, notices mailed, calls attempted. I scrolled to the line that matched the date I remembered sending a transfer and felt my chest tighten. There was no corresponding mortgage payment that month, nor the month after. I scrolled further, as if turning pages in a book that I already knew would end badly. The story did not change. The story was the absence of change. I poured hot water over a tea bag and watched the color bloom through the cup, a slow cloud becoming itself. I could have called Macy. I could have called anyone. Instead, I carried the tea to the desk and opened a new folder on my computer. I named it simply Westwood and placed the email inside. Then I added a scan of my bank transfers from the period when I had sent money most often. I added screenshots of messages where I had been told I was covering the mortgage. I added a copy of the delinquency notice with the postmark date. The folder looked small, but the weight behind it felt enormous. Not because I planned to fight for the house. I would not. But because clarity deserved room of its own. The phone rang again. This time it was my mother. For several breaths, I considered letting it go. Then I answered and placed the call on speaker so I could breathe with both hands free. She began with my name in that stretched way that always felt like a scolding. She said the bank was exaggerating. She said they would fix it if I would help one last time and that we would all be grateful later. I told her I had spoken to the bank. I told her about the 8 months. She said life had been expensive and that I knew how it was. I told her I had the summary in front of me. She asked why I was digging through their business. The shift was so quick it might have been comical if it had not been so familiar. From pleading to offense, from we to are to mine the second the light moved. I asked where my money had gone. I asked it calmly. I asked it as if I were at work and a number did not reconcile. She said some had gone to medical costs, and some to the roof repair, and some to the car when Matthew's transmission failed. I reminded her that I had sent separate money for the roof repair the previous year. She fell quiet and then changed the subject. The house is what matters now. If we lose it, everyone will know you walked away. There it was, not the fear of losing shelter, the fear of losing the story. The story where I was the cold one, the selfish one, the daughter who abandoned them. I breathed once and pictured the mint leaves outside. I told her I would not send money. She told me I would regret it. I told her I had already regretted too many things and this would not be one of them. When we hung up, I let the silence stand and did not rush to fill it. The tea had gone warm. I drank it anyway. I sat with the fatigue that comes when a truth finishes crossing the final distance to your body. That evening, the sky over the city turned the color of bruised plums and then deepened until the buildings looked like cutouts against a velvet backdrop. I made myself dinner and ate it slowly, each bite an act of attention. Then I opened my laptop again and searched for the County Public Records portal. It was not a site designed for ease, but I made my way through it like a pilgrim touching each carved mark on a stone wall. I entered the address. The parcel number appeared, then a list of recorded documents. Deed, mortgage, modification, lien. I clicked each one. My name was nowhere. Of course it was nowhere. Seeing it with my own eyes still moved something through me, a final wave that washed over the last sandcastle of doubt. I printed the deed and set it next to the bank summary. A pair of pages that together told the entire plot twist without any dramatic music. The house was never mine, and the house had been in trouble before anyone told me it was. I could have cried. Sometimes I still do when an old shard catches the light. But that night, I felt a steadiness that did not require tears. I closed the folder, both on the computer and on the desk, and slid the printed pages into a plain envelope. I wrote another word on the front. Clarity. Before bed, I stepped onto the balcony. The city hummed below like a tireless animal. Somewhere in that hum were all the families that did not know how to love each other well, and all the ones that did, and all the ones learning. The mint brushed my wrist when I reached to turn the little pot so the leaves would grow straight. The touch startled me with its tenderness. I thought of the years my hands had moved in service to people who did not want what I gave them except as proof that I would never stop. I looked at my hands in the glow from the kitchen and decided they belonged to me again. When I turned back inside, the phone lit up one more time. This time it was my father. The message was short. You will answer me. I stared at it and felt the old reflex rise, the one that coiled around my spine and pulled me forward by the neck. Then I let the reflex pass through me and disperse like smoke. I did not answer. I put the phone on the dresser, washed my face, brushed my teeth, and climbed into bed. Sleep came quickly but not shallowly. It came in that rare way when the body knows it has done enough for the day. In the dark before morning, I dreamed of paper boats floating on a rain-swollen curb and felt no urgency to chase them. I woke just before dawn with the taste of peppermint still soft in my mouth and a sentence forming clearly in my mind, a sentence I would need when the calls began again after sunrise. It was simple. I am not a borrower on that house. I am not an owner of that house. I am not the story you keep telling about me. I repeated it once, memorizing the shape of it, then sat up into the thin blue light and met the day as if it had been waiting for me to arrive as myself. The days after the discovery blurred together. Every morning I woke with the same thought, a sentence carved deep: the house was never mine. It repeated in my head with each cup of coffee, each walk to the subway, each quiet evening in my apartment. At first the words felt like a wound, then like a scar, and finally like a map. They showed me where I had been walking blind for years. My mother called again on Tuesday. I almost did not pick up, but part of me wanted to hear what story she would tell this time. Her voice was smooth, almost sweet, as if she believed gentleness would erase the truth. Daniela, the house is part of your legacy. Don't you want to protect where you grew up? Don't you want to honor what we built? I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, staring at the envelope on my desk labeled Clarity. When I spoke, my voice was calm. It is not my legacy. My name was never on it. You spent my money and lied about where it went. That house was never mine to lose. Her tone cracked. So you'll let us end up on the street? You'll let strangers take what should belong to us? No, I said, steady now. I'm letting you face what already belongs to you. There was silence on the other end, thick and heavy. Then the line went dead. The next day my father tried. His message was brief, almost cryptic. Blood binds us. You can't change that. I deleted it without reply. Blood may bind, but love sustains. Without love, blood is just biology. Matthew was less subtle. A string of texts filled my screen late one night. You think you're better than us. You think walking away makes you strong. Guess what? When the house is gone, you'll regret it. Everyone will know it was your fault. I stared at the words, my pulse steady. For years those sentences would have gutted me. For years I would have scrambled to prove him wrong. Now they were only words typed in anger, bouncing against the wall of my boundary and falling flat. I blocked his number. The storm outside them grew louder as the foreclosure process advanced. Letters piled at their door. Neighbors whispered. My aunt called me once, trying to play peacemaker, telling me family was everything. I told her family is trust. Family is care. Family is truth. Without those, it is only a story that keeps people trapped. She did not call again, and yet, even with the storm raging, my own life began to grow roots. I met Macy again, this time not for coffee but for dinner at a small Thai place tucked into a corner of the neighborhood. She listened as I told her about the bank records, the discovery that I had never had any claim to the house. She shook her head, anger flashing in her eyes on my behalf. That's theft, Daniela. Emotional theft. Financial theft. But the worst part is how they stole your belief that you mattered only if you gave. Her words pierced me. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I thought sacrifice was proof of love, but maybe it was just proof that I didn't believe I deserved more. You do, she said simply. You deserve so much more. That night, walking home under the glow of the street lamps, I realized that clarity had not just freed me from them. It was beginning to free me for myself. The final storm broke on a Friday. My mother's number flashed again, and for reasons I can't explain, I answered. Her voice was frantic, her words tumbling over each other. They're taking it, the bank, we can't stop them. If you just... I cut her off, my voice stronger than I expected. This was never mine to save. You made sure of that when you left my name off the papers. You can blame me to the neighbors, to the family, to anyone who will listen. But I know the truth now. and I will not carry your lie anymore." Her sob was sharp, but I did not let it pierce me. I ended the call, set the phone down, and sat in silence. The storm was not mine. It never had been, and for the first time, I let the rain fall without running into it. The first morning after the storm ended, the city felt like it had been washed and set back on its shelf. I stood on my balcony with a mug clasped in both hands and watched the sky change from a quiet blue to the color of fresh linen. For months, my days had started with alarms disguised as phone calls. Now the only thing that asked anything of me was the mint plant reaching toward the light. I pinched a leaf and rolled it between my fingers until my skin carried its clean brightness. I breathed it in and told myself the truth out loud. I am free. Freedom did not arrive like a parade. It arrived like a well-made bed, like clean dishes stacked to dry, like the first page of a new notebook that waits without rushing you. I did not need to prove anything to it. I only needed to live inside of it. I began by rearranging the apartment, not because it was messy, but because the rooms still remembered my old posture. I moved the couch so it faced the window instead of the wall. I placed the desk where the morning sun could touch my shoulders. I took the envelope labeled Clarity and slid it into a file box on the top shelf of my closet. I did not hide it in a drawer where it could haunt me. I put it high where it could gather dust like a finished chapter. When I stepped back, the space looked almost the same, but my body read it differently. The new angles taught my eyes a new horizon. At work, I asked my manager for a meeting and spoke plainly. I told her I wanted to protect my evenings, that I would no longer answer emails after 7 except during true emergencies. I expected pushback. I received questions and then respect. We set a plan for coverage, and I felt my lungs expand in a way I had not allowed in years. It turned out most of the bars I pressed against were the ones I had built to hold myself in place. On a Wednesday, Macy texted me a simple invitation: yoga after work. I stood in the studio with the smell of wood and citrus polish in the air and tried not to judge myself for the way my muscles trembled. The instructor guided us through slow shapes with names that sounded like small prayers. Mountain, child, bridge. I lay on my back at the end with one hand on my chest and one on my stomach and felt the breath move between them like a tide that belonged to me alone. When I sat up, my face was wet and I did not feel ashamed. Relief has a way of dressing itself as tears when it has nowhere else to go. I made a new budget that had only my name at the top. I opened a savings account with a nickname that made me smile. I called it Sea Morning. I had never seen the ocean at dawn. I wanted to. I set a small automatic transfer every payday. The number was not grand. It did not need to be. The spreadsheet that used to glare at me now looked like a landscape I could walk through without sinking. I printed the page and taped it under the list above my desk. I will build a life that does not require me to disappear. Underneath it, a line of numbers that felt like footsteps. On Saturday, I did not set an alarm. I woke when my body was done sleeping and walked to the farmer's market with a cloth bag over my shoulder. I bought tomatoes that tasted like sun and a loaf of bread still crackling from the oven. A man sold wildflowers by the stem and told me to remember to change the water after 2 days. I chose a handful and arranged them in a glass near the sink. The petals made the kitchen look like it had been listening and then decided to answer. The phone still existed. It still held voicemails from old numbers and unknown ones that sounded like old numbers hiding. I let them sit without opening. They were no longer doors. They were rocks on the side of the road. Things you notice and walk past. I blocked one more number and then changed the settings so only contacts could ring through. It felt like closing a window before a storm you know will skirt the edge of town and move on. That night, I did something I had put off for years. I wrote a letter I would never send. Not to ask for anything. Not to persuade. Only to open a window in myself and let air move through a room that had been closed. I wrote Dear Mom, and then I did not list my accomplishments or catalog my hurts. I wrote what I wished she had said when I told the truth. I wrote I am sorry I did not protect you. I wrote you are not a bank. You are not my plan. You are my daughter. I wrote I love you and I am proud. When I finished, I folded the paper and slid it into a plain envelope with no name. I placed it in the file box beside Clarity. The letter was not for her. It was a mirror in which I could finally see myself whole. Sunday afternoon, I visited a gallery that featured local photographers. I stood too long in front of an image of a woman walking alone across a winter beach, her coat whipping behind her, her hair haloed by cold light. There was no one else in the frame. She did not look lost. She looked chosen. I bought a postcard print of that photograph from the small shop by the exit and taped it above the light switch next to the door. A tiny compass I could see every time I left the apartment or came home. Small rituals gathered around me without announcement. I watered the mint plant and then added basil because mint should not be lonely. I set a reminder to stretch my wrists every hour because my work asks my hands to hold a keyboard more than it asks them to hold joy, and I need them for both. I switched the harsh ceiling bulb for a warm lamp, and the night stopped feeling like a warehouse. I learned the names of the people in my building. Mrs. Doan in 2B, who grows jade plants and calls everyone sweetheart. Marco in 3C, who is a baker and leaves a bag of day-old rolls by the mailboxes on Fridays with a note that says take what you need. I took one once and ate it standing barefoot in my kitchen. The bread tasted like generosity without strings. There were moments when grief still arrived like a sudden drop in temperature. It would come when I smelled bleach or heard a television game, sound from an open window, or walked past a display of cookie tins in a grocery store. My body is a careful archivist. It keeps the record of everything. When that happened, I did not scold it. I placed a hand over my ribs and told myself you are safe now and waited for the shiver to pass. Near the end of the month, I scheduled a single session with a therapist. I told her the short version and then the long one. I told her the facts and the feelings and the parts that were too tangled to separate. She did not look away when I spoke about the money. She did not flinch when I described the quiet. She asked me what freedom looked like in one day, not in a year. So I described a Tuesday where I make oatmeal and take a walk and answer emails without apology and let the phone ring without swallowing my heart. She smiled gently and said that sounded like a life. I wrote Tuesday Life on a sticky note and pressed it to the back of my phone case where only I could see it. The old house entered my thoughts less and less. It returned now and then like a street from a dream, familiar and far. I did not chase it. I let it pass behind the trees. I knew the bank would complete its process, and keys would change hands and new furniture would scrape those floors. I hoped the next life inside those walls would learn how to be softer than the last. One evening, I stood by the window with the lights off and watched rain bead and slide. It reminded me of the first nights after I left, when the quiet felt like a cliff edge. I pressed my palm to the glass and counted my breaths until the fear that used to follow me everywhere lost interest and wandered off. I said one more truth out loud, half to the mint plant and half to the woman in the beach photograph. I am not a secret I keep from myself anymore. I booked a train for a weekend at the coast, not because I needed a grand gesture, but because the line called Sea Morning asked to be more than a name in a cell. I did not tell many people. I printed the ticket and placed it inside my wallet like a folded piece of sky. On the last night before the trip, I packed a small bag, a sweater, a book, a journal. I stood in the doorway before turning out the light and looked at the room that had learned me and let me learn it back. The flowers on the counter had begun to lean, but they were still bright. The desk held my list and my budget and no ghosts. The couch faced the window. The night faced me. I slept without dreams. And when the alarm rang in the early blue of morning, I rose with the kind of ease that feels borrowed the first time you feel it and then starts to belong to you. Freedom was not a finish line. It was the path under my feet and the way I chose to walk it. Tomorrow, I would meet the ocean at dawn. Tonight, I stood in my doorway and felt as whole as a closed book that knows another chapter waits. The train to the coast left just after dawn. I sat by the window with a small bag at my feet and a thermos of coffee warming my palms. The city slipped past in fragments, graffiti on brick, a row of laundry strung between balconies, the glint of water under a bridge. I watched it without clutching at it, letting each scene go the moment it vanished. That too was freedom, not having to hold everything. As the train curved out of the city, the landscape opened into stretches of fields and distant hills. I thought of the years I had spent measuring my life in bills and obligations. Every mile between me and that old house felt like erasing a chalk mark from a board. Not erasing the memory, the record would always be there, but removing the claim it had on me. At the coast, the air tasted of salt and carried a dampness that clung to my skin. I checked into a small inn run by an elderly couple who handed me a brass key attached to a wooden block. The room had a single bed, a desk by the window, and curtains that billowed with the sea breeze. It was simple, and it was enough. That evening, I walked barefoot along the beach. The sand was cool under my feet, the tide folding and unfolding with patient strength. I let the water lap at my ankles and tilted my head back to watch gulls dip across the fading sky. For so long, I had associated silence with punishment. But here, the silence was alive, the kind that listens, the kind that soothes. The next morning I woke before the sun. I carried a blanket and a notebook down to the shore. The sky was still gray when I sat on the sand, my breath visible in the chill air. Slowly, the horizon bled into color, first pale pink, then gold, then a blaze of orange that stretched across the waves. The sea mirrored the light until it looked like liquid fire. I pressed the notebook to my knees and wrote, not to anyone, not for anyone, but for myself. I wrote about the girl who had once believed love had to be earned. I wrote about the woman who had stood at a kitchen table and said she was not a bank. I wrote about the choice to walk away and the fear that had once felt like a wall but had turned out to be a doorway. When the sun rose fully and spilled light across the page, I wrote one final sentence. I am allowed to take up space in this world without apologizing for it. The waves erased my footprints as I walked back, and I let them. The beach did not need to remember me. I was the one who needed to remember myself. Back at the inn, the owner asked if I had slept well. I smiled and said yes, but what I wanted to say was more. I wanted to tell him I had slept without the weight of anyone else's expectations pressing on my chest. I wanted to tell him I had dreamed of nothing, which felt like the most beautiful dream of all. When I boarded the train home 2 days later, I carried no souvenirs except the notebook with pages filled by the sea. My bag was as light as when I arrived, but inside me, something had shifted. I had left pieces of myself on that shore, pieces that no longer belonged to the story of being used. As the city skyline rose again in the distance, I felt no dread. My apartment was waiting, my plants were waiting, the desk with the taped list was waiting. And this time, I was returning not as someone escaping, not as someone running from guilt, but as someone walking toward her own life. That night, I placed the notebook beside the mint and basil on the windowsill. I lit a candle and watched its flame dance against the glass. For the first time in years, I whispered the word home, and I knew I was speaking not of any building, not of any family, but of myself.